We'll now talk about loops and decisions. We've got the if statement and also the for loop. We'll talk about each of those, and starting off with the if statement, but these are probably the two most important constructs in the whole of programming. We have our basic C++ program with main, which is our entry, call that an entry point, and return 0 corresponding to int, and IOStream when we're going to be using from some couts. So let's just introduce a bit of sample code which uses an if statement. Well, it says we're defining x equals 2, and now we're saying if x is greater than 1. Well, is it true that x is greater than 1? Yes, it is. If x is 2, then x is greater than 1. And then we want to output the value of yes. Well, let's see if this indeed does that. I'm quite confident, so I'm just going to run the program straight away, and it gives me the answer yes, obviously. Well, if I were to change that to something else like x is 3, if x is greater than 2, for example, will that still work? Well, it won't actually. So it won't actually do anything when I run the program, because x is 2, x is not greater than 2, so logically that's not correct. So you get no output at all. Now this is an if statement, and it doesn't have a semicolon after it. That's because the line next to it, after it I should say, is what is executed, and there's your semicolon. So you could consider that all as one line, but indeed it does appear like that more than not. We could try something like this, where we've got what we call a comparison. Now a comparison here, we've got a double equal sign that says if x equals 2. Well, is x equal to? So this is what we call a comparison, and this is called an assignment. In other words, we've got one equal sign here, and here you've got two equals for an assignment. And so if you run that, you'll find that it still gives us the value of yes. But that's easy to get caught out of that and forget to include the double equal sign when you're comparing. If I try this bit of code now, because what we're doing is using an if statement. Well, let me just modify that code, and what I want to do is have two statements being executed by the if. So I want these two to be executed. Now if I were to run this, it would actually only execute this code here, because that one sort of belongs to the if statement. So if I want to execute both of those, I have to use curly braces, comme ça. And if I just bring that one down to here and tab it in, and then now if I build that builds fine, and then if I now run it, you'll find that both of those statements are executed. So I can just run that, and you'll see both of them are executed because it's in the block. So that's the idea of the braces. You build a block, and both of those will be executed. Another use of the braces is to have an else statement as well. So if da-da-da-da, then else something or other. Let's just make it simple for the moment. I'll just have one statement being executed here, so I won't need my braces. And okay, so what we're saying is that if x is equal to 2, which it is, then execute the first bit, else execute the second bit. Now let's just see if that works. What do you think the output's going to be in this case? The output is yes, and that's because x equals 2, it's going to execute that line. Now, we can try it out, we can test our program. If we put x equal to 3, for example, which is not 2, then when we run that, you'll find that the else, for a change, what I'll do is I'll put a breakpoint in here, and this is where it does it, and run it up to there. Now, this is where it does its comparison. Now, and okay, so it's up to this line here. If I press F11, then that should now jump over to here, you see, the else, and be careful, don't use the F11 here, because it will get into all sorts of trouble. So the best way at the moment, well, you could press F10, but it seems that it's not quite working at the moment, so I'll go to debug step over F10, you see here, and that just jumps over, and I could actually just run to the end of the program if I wanted to, or indeed I could just stop it, which is what I'll do. So that's the if and then the else statement. We have now a strange-ish one, which is the else if. Let's see what that does. I'll take the breakpoint off and paste the whole of the code in there. Now, let's see what we've got here. We've got x equals 2, which, and then you say if x is greater than 2. Well, is it greater than 2? Certainly not. X is equal to 2. Then else you can execute. Is it true that x is greater than 1? Yes, it is. So this statement should be executed. Now, is it true that x is greater than 0? Well, if I look at 2, then we'd say yes, it is greater than 0. So this statement you would think might be executed as well. But let's see what happens. If I just run that straight away, then the output, oops, no C and get, and the output, if that should hold the screen up for me, of course, and I can just run that straight away. And now the output, you see, is a bit strange. It's only x is greater than 1. Now you might logically think, well, hang on, that should be executed as well, and that should give you the value that x is greater than 0, which it is. But the way the else if works is that once it finds 1, which is true, it finishes. It's quite satisfied, thank you very much, and will just terminate. It won't actually even consider this. It's a funny thing to try and understand the else if. It's like a multiple if statement. If you do this, else if, do this, else if, do this, else if, do that. But anyway, that's the way it works. Once it finds 1, it won't go on to consider any other. Now, we've got something which is very similar to the else if, and that's the switch statement. Now, if I just include that code, the switch. Now, it says here if int x equals 5. Well, indeed it's 5. Let me just put a breakpoint here, and I'll run it down to there. Where's my run button? There it is. Now, so it runs down to there, and of course, if you hold your mouse on the x, it'll tell you that x is going to be 5. If I do an F11, then x is 5. Now, where do you think it's going to go next? It's going to go switch on the value of 5 down here. So it jumps straight away down to that. So if I press F11, it jumps there, and it should now output that. If I can just debug step over, and you can see it's printed to the screen. It's printed the value of 5, but now where is it going to go? It's going to break and then finish, you see. Now, well, that's fine. That's the way. So this is the select case is a little bit of a menu system as well. It looks a bit better than what it is. We can use it for making a menu of selection, but it does have its limitations. The limitation really is it's quite tricky to do more than one variable here. So you could say case x equals 2, y equals 5, but you can't. You can only you restrict it to one variable. If you were to leave out these breaks here, when you run it, it will run straight through. If you were to delete all those breaks, you can try it. It will print out this bit here, and then it will fall through to do this bit here. So it will do both of those things. If you can try that for yourself. Okay. Now, so that's the if and the switch statement. We talk about now that the for loop, the basic for loop, looks like this. Now, there it is there. That's the basic thing. I've missed a semicolon here. Right, now, and there's a missing less than sign here as well. Okay, now, if let me just run it. Okay, run that and see what happens. It prints out the values from 0, 1, 2, 3. Why? Well, the for loop for I equals that to I equals less than 4, it means I has got the value of 0, 1, 2, and 3, not 4. So it's less than 4. Now, and it's a little bit tricky to remember the for construction if you really want to have a less than, semicolons in between. And why isn't it comma? Well, it's semicolon. You've just got to remember that. And the other thing you've got to remember is you can't have an equal sign here. Well, you can have an equal in combination with it, but you must have some sort of less than or greater than. This means that you increment I by 1 each time. You could actually have an increment like this, where you have the I that's incremented by 2, plus equals. That means you can increment by 2 as you go along. You could have I minus minus as well and make it go down, but be careful if you're doing that. You've got to start off with a large number here and a smaller number there and decrease it, otherwise you'll go into a bit of an infinite loop. Okay, so that's the basic idea of a for loop. It will, as it stands here, it will execute the next line, which is that. In fact, you could actually have that and on the same line, and if I just restore that to where it was, and that would do exactly the same as what we did before. Now, what about if you want to execute one more statement in the for loop? Let me just put that back down again, and if you want to execute another statement in the for loop, well, what will happen in this case? What will happen in this case is that this line here is the only one which will be executed 4 times, and then this one here will be executed once. So what we need to do is to enclose those once again in curly braces. I'll just bring that curly brace down and just drag it down, and now then tab it across. Now you'll see it should execute both of those statements. There's no semicolon. Remember, there's no semicolon here after the for loop. And that means this whole section of code will be executed. Let me just show you. I'll stop it, then I'll just run the code, and you can see that both of those statements are executed. The number I and the statement that it's looping. So that's how you use a for loop and how you use the curly braces as well. Now, allied to the for loop, you've got the while loop. Now, let me just introduce that. Now, you'll probably say, well, this is just the same, isn't it? And it is in this situation. Now, the while loop, in this case, I'm doing 2 things here, so I've got it in curly braces. While I is less than 4. Well, it certainly starts off less than 4, I is 0, and it should output this value from 0, 1, 2, 3. And then increment. Now we have to do this ourselves within the while loop, you see. So, all right, we'll just run that, and you'll see that we're actually getting much the same as what we've got before using the for loop. So there's still not really much difference between the while. There are variations on the do while. Notice where on the while. Notice we had here the while was up here, and you can actually have the while like this. You can have the while down here, while I is less. There's a very subtle difference here, and the subtle difference, why is that complaining? In main return, semicolon's missing up here for some reason or other. Okay, right, I'll put that back in, and that should be fine. Now if I build that, and then I can run it as well. Then I run it, and you'll see it does much the same as what we've been doing with the do loop. So it does so with the for loop. So not much change there. But let's try and find an example of where it might be different. Now, what I've got here is a bit of right. Let's see what this does. A bit of code. I define a character. Why is that moaning about? I'm missing my iostream. Okay, so Control C, right, and then paste it in there. That should fix that up. Okay, now what are we doing here? We've got a do and a while, which we've seen. So it basically goes around. You've got to be careful with these. They might go into an infinite loop and seize up your computer. Anyway, what it does, it takes input from the keyboard in the form of this character C. Now then it outputs the C as well. And it says while C is not equal to the letter A. Well, let me just see what it does. I'm going to run it, and then it says, okay, so I'm going to input a character, so I'll press the letter S and then press the enter key, and it repeats the S. So it takes the S in from the keyboard, and then it what we say, it echoes it to the screen. In other words, it outputs it to the screen. And then it says while the character itself is not equal to A, keep going. So indeed I will keep going. I'll put another letter F, and that just keeps going. But watch what happens. I'm now going to press A, and as I press enter, watch what happens. Gone. Okay, now what that means is that once it found the letter A as being import, then it terminated, returned 0 and finished up. Well, you see, what we're doing is inputting it, and we don't find out what the value of C is until runtime. Runtime means when the program is working. I'll just emphasize that and run the program. If I can find my run button, there it is. And then see, this is now in runtime, and in runtime we're inputting a character and pressing enter, but in runtime we're putting in the letter A, and the computer at runtime here will determine that A will terminate the program. So if I do input A and press enter, at runtime it determines that it will finish up. Now, what's the point of this? The point of it is that the do while, you see, will operate at runtime until it finds the condition to stop. Whereas, remember, with a for loop, it went round a certain number of times. Okay, well, that's basically it for the construction of the for loop and the for loop, the do loop, and the do while, and so on, and the next. Okay, now we did talk about a problem that we had, and it's a good idea to take a look at that problem. And you may recall that it was something like this. We had a problem, and the problem was to swap these two variables. Now, at the moment, if I run this code, it's got a value of 3 and 4, so it'll output 3 and output 4, and it'll do just the same thing again. So if I were to run that, it just prints out 3 and 4. And then once again it'll print out 3 and 4 again. Now what I want to do is actually swap those two values around, and I want to do the code in here to swap them. Now you might remember I gave you a little hint on what to do. We need to have a temporary variable here. We'll see why in a moment. Now so I'll get rid of this, and then what I want to do is to do the obvious. So I'll say that var1 is equal to var2. Now, and well, that looks pretty good, but what happens when I run it? Well, I'll build it, and then I'm going to run it, and then what happens? Well, unfortunately, they both have the same value, and you can see the reason for that is that this has got the value of 4. And remember, programming works from right to left, so it goes across, and so I'll leave you to write the rest of the code to be able to swap those two, and then we'll consider the next part using the if statement.